From the subreddit antiwork. Will things get better or will America collapse? Seems like the government and corporations would rather go under than fix the problems against the working class. The rich seem to be wanting to grab as much as they can before it all collapses. I guess they expect to fly away to another country to live like they did to avoid big coronavirus areas last year. I guess that because they have money in the bank that any country will take them as long as they can pay. This is the lowest I have ever seen the general morale of regular people in the United States. I'm 50 years old and grew up and still live in a part of Rust Belt rural/industrial Pennsylvania. I watched as the coal mining, steel making, cement, truck manufacturing, slate quarrying, and railroads all disappeared. The jobs were tough, but many actually allowed families to own a home on one-salary. Warehouses with low-paid jobs now fill the deindustrialized landscape that even a two-person household can barely afford to rent an apartment, let alone buy a house. Things here have been falling apart for years, from infrastructure to public schools to responsible government to the economy at large. Now we have a few rich people, a lot of former middle class who've fallen into near poverty, and the actual poor. I've been listening to Mike Duncan's Revolutions podcast. In every revolution he's covered, if the elites had made better decisions and/or made a few concessions, they wouldn't have been overthrown. With the massive gap between the billionaires and rest, and the shocks from pandemics and climate change, it's going to get ugly. Lots of rich people wondering if the walls of their gated communities are high enough. Unless we organize and place maximum pressure, things will not improve for us. As for America, its best days are over. This country, for whatever reason, cannot come to terms with its own shortcomings and is very short-sighted in its objectives. The two aren't mutually exclusive. You'd probably like the podcast. It could happen here. It's a daily podcast discussing this very concept. Start with Season 2 if you're sensitive to doom. Season 2 is uplifting, Season 1 is kinda bleak. Also, the first 5 episodes of Season 2 are evergreen and not topical. They are still a bit uplifting but more lay out the premise of what we're trying to work past. Don't see things improving with REITs and investment firms continuing to gobble up real estate, and Gen Z burdened with even more student debt than the millennials, and politicians of all types too deep in the pockets of big corporations to change the tax laws to stop the 0.01% siphoning off more and more. The 50-plus year trend of stagnating wages and increasing income inequality could be stopped with enough political will, but the type of Democrats who might attempt to change the shitty tax laws also tend to be strongly aligned with various culture war issues, which is a vote loser with a lot of the working class. If how they treat the environment is any yardstick, corporate America will eat itself before they concede profits to anyone but themselves. They have convinced themselves they are separate from workers, almost seeing themselves as a mix of royalty and the owners of freed slaves. Things will get better for the super rich until they take us all down, including themselves, but things won't get better for America. There's 5 tiers in the USA in my mind: the 0.01%, the 1%, the 10%, then there's this layer of 10% that kinda made it but is still a medical diagnosis or massive storm away from ruin. They can't afford rising college tuition, so their kids are screwed, but they'll be okay enough if they play it safe. Then there's the bottom 80% that is either paycheck to paycheck or is almost there, like myself. We'll go down in that order of tiers. The middle managers, 10%, could see their way of life disappear much sooner than expected. America is going to collapse. It's inevitable. I'm not a gloomy or depressed person. That's just a fact. It's going down. We're already mid-collapse. We had to write a paper in a law class about how life would look in 2084. It was a spin on George Orwell's 1984. Some of the changes we predicted have already come about: gay marriages, legalization of marijuana, more technology, etc. One thing that almost everybody mentioned was that in 2084, we would be referred to as the former United States of America. We're probably a couple of years away from fascism with the current situation. Either way, I'm planning on becoming a Morlock, occasionally coming to the surface to eat the alloy. %100 Truth. Corporations and the state are trying to run the global ecosystem to death and pimp workers to death in order to maintain their luxuries and privilege right now. There is absolutely no intentions by any nation or corporation to do anything whatsoever that benefits the poor and working class. Why? Because the more people who fall into poverty and homelessness, the more scared everyone else becomes of poverty and toils away for their economically abusive employers more and more to keep the economy afloat. It's all a bullshit cycle. Removing oneself as much as possible from economy, And absolutely refusing to be productive for an employer at every possible opportunity is the only way to stop the for-profit leviathan that is killing the planet. Find out next week on We Hate Poor People. So glad I'm engaged young and we're not having biological kids. Catch me and my 36 foster kids riding the war rig to Gastown, shiny and chrome. More likely options: minor collapse and USA comes out better, major collapse and Putin decides it's his chance to fist USA once and for all. Arrogance via wealth and dependence on military might has America doomed. Instead of advancing to a global level, it's stuck on nationalism. Lobbyists serve the rich and make laws to support their agenda, divisions are increased among the workers, people are tired of trying. Nope, collapse is the direction. All empires eventually collapse. Collapse eventually. Maybe violent labor uprisings are needed every 100 years or so. Anyway, the world isn't like it used to be, somebody will outcompete us. All of this military buildup, but I don't think it will take a war to tear this thing down. Fixing the problems of the working class is a matter of national security. I do have a feeling that we'll learn that the hard way. Collapse. It started a long time ago. I think people are waiting for one main event when it's actually a lot of small things happening at once all over. Things are only going to get worse. Pretty soon, with rising inflation and stagnant wages, people won't be able to afford to even work anymore, and they will take to the streets. The police will put this down initially, but soon be overwhelmed, so they will call in the National Guard. Most people will be homeless due to out-of-control rents, and society really will collapse. Personally, I'd give it 3 years before this happens. It is easier to imagine the end of the world than it is to imagine the end of capitalism. Not sure who said it, Zizek. But it highlights the issue succinctly. Also, the documentary Hyperrealism discusses the fall of the Soviet Union and the psychological response to that. It might be the case that the population cannot deal with the concept of capitalism failing, as we have no other alternative ideologies to follow. It won't get better. This is a late-stage capitalist hellscape that the 1% will exploit until there's no one and nothing left to exploit. We will just start having longer droughts, more wildfires, bigger storms, and nothing will change. Even when there's obviously nothing left, they'll still be clinging to the Constitution, no matter how extremely outdated for modern society. It'll just be a fight for resources, and then services give out. More disease sets in. This clogged bowl of shit barely even swirls in the porcelain throne anymore. It's too clogged. At the end of the day, greed has won. 80% of the working class in the USA lives paycheck to paycheck. Huge mental health crisis, drug crisis. Society has already collapsed in many cities. Stock market collapses in 2020. We already are in the end times. BBC posted an article a few years back about the collapse of the Western world. There were several models ran, and they found that inequality among elites and working people would be a huge threat to Western society in the upcoming years, almost as big as climate change. They were surprised to find this. I think that people need to start banding together to uprise. I can't vouch that it was the reason, but have a good feeling that since the bubonic plague killed off feudalism, can't verify, wasn't alive, that COVID-19 shall have the same effect on end-stage capitalism/oligarchy/ whatever you want to call it. I sure hope so. Fuck this system. They can't go under. They create the system and they can use it to direct labor to smooth over inconsistencies as long as they can access the real resources needed to do so. Those who hold a monopoly on violence, and not just the kinetic kind, can maintain the monopoly on exploitation and the monopoly on system creation. It's not like they have a franchise agreement with Pluto that enables them to rule the world. America will stagger around like an undead empire for another few decades, barring actual global collapse. Then we'll become like Britain is now, minus the social safety net. Fun times await. I'm fully expecting America to go through some kind of major crisis/collapse within the next 20 years. I'm moving somewhere that has socialism. Empires usually last for about 250 years. The US has been around for 245 years, but of course this is not a fixed thing. But if you look at the current state of the US right now, with a mega wealthy 1% class hoarding everything, extreme poverty, violent and often racist policing, almost daily occurrences of gun violence, collapsing infrastructures, moral decay, rampant drug use and a strong tendency toward fascistic and authoritarian politics, all that combined with the steady loss of political influence around the world, all the signs point to some kind of collapse, or at least a partial collapse. And if you factor in the enormous issues caused by climate change, it's quite possible the US will not last in its current form for much longer, but who knows what form it will take or when it's going to happen. I am short selling the USA. It will collapse. When it happens, there will be nationwide riots that make all the riots that happened before seem like a minor inconvenience. I channeled the spirit of Nostradamus, and you all have been warned.